And the thing is, Tim, Patrick Armstrong does have a point here. There's really no common ground at all when you talk to Americans, when you kind of get inside their heads. Americans love conspiracy theories, but they don't love the same conspiracy theories. So
No,
we have a
we're
problem
definitely
here.
divided in that way as well too. Absolutely. Uh,
So we have a problem here, and the central thesis is Americans need a conspiracy theory that we can all agree on. And I mean, I grew up with there were popular ones, and they've changed over time. Mr. Armstrong talks about the Trump won the 2020 election conspiracy
mhm.
theory, but with people on Team Blue, there's no common ground, and conspirology can be manipulated to keep people sort of at odds
Mhm.
here. Now, Tim, Patrick Armstrong has had a long career in areas of diplomacy.
Yeah.
He's written on geopolitics and geostrategy for a number of years. He was recently, I want to say, harassed by
Oh.
people operating under the color of something in Canada, relating to his work, to his analysis. So we
Uh-huh.
live in a funny time when people are questioned about that stuff. But Tim, do you know about that? Did you
Well,
hear? Did
no,
you read his
actually,
blog?
how about this? Because I have not heard about this, Patrick. Why don't we, before we actually get into our topic fully at this moment, could you tell us about this? This is interesting.
As you know, I've been writing for Strategic Culture Fund for some time.
Yeah.
And you know what's happening in the States with people who write for it. They get visited by the FBI, and eventually all the American writers got a letter saying, if you continue to do this, we're going to sue you right down to your underwear and beyond.
Hmm.
So I knew this was out there for a year or so. And sure enough, a month or so, it's in my website. I got a visit from our boys from CSIS,
Hmm.
Canadian Security and Intelligence Service. And they asked two questions. Had SCF ever changed anything I'd written? No, not even typos. And secondly, did they ever suggest or twist that I write something in a certain way? And I said, no, they hadn't. Been a couple of times they'd asked me to write on a particular subject, and they'd never changed a word I'd said. And I said, by the way, I've done this before on websites. You change what I write, I'm gone. Goodbye.
Yeah.
Nobody changes what I write. I'm an independent operator. So it was all sort of polite but menacing. Yes, of course it was. It was CSIS, but at least they didn't do the whole business of two of them. So it was a friendly chat. And as he left, he wished me a good day and said I could phone them at any time. Now, I had
Interesting.
a lot to do with CSIS in my job, and I have an extremely low opinion of CSIS as an analytic organization. So if you read the thing I wrote in my website, I said, did you know about the guy that we fired
Hmm.
because he'd been lying about his credentials for 20 years? And then you guys hired him. Oh, no, he hadn't heard of that. I mean, he was a young guy. Of course, he wouldn't have heard of it. And a couple of other things. CSIS is, how should we put it? Not intelligence is perhaps not the correct word to apply to their analytic skills. So, I mean, I'm not so stupid that I don't know what's coming. I'm 74 years old. I got a nice pension. I wrote for SCF because I enjoyed doing it, and they sent me money,
Hmm.
which was nice, pin money basically. And so sorry, SCF, I've quit. Somebody else will pick me up. It'll be okay. I've written for you before, Walking. So
Yeah.
somebody else will pick me up. It's okay. And I do this too. It's either that or drink and watch daytime TV.
Well, see, the weird thing about
But
this is,
yeah, so just like my American friends, and I'd been told about
mm.
it. So that's what's, um, of course, they're all aware of the time Putin called all these guys tobaccos.
Oh,
So
well,
when Sher Khan growls, the
uh,
tobaccos obey. So
yeah,
it's coming to Canada too.
I see.
The actual thing with SCF was a presidential order, which of course is how these things are done. In Canada, we do orders in council. Just a decree that SCF was being run by the Russian Foreign Intelligence Service,
Hmm.
which I don't believe.
I
I
haven't
mean,
heard of that yet. I mean, from
anyway,
anyone within it. So yeah.
That's the official accusation. Now, I don't know who runs SCF. My guess is it's some plutocrat.
Mm-hmm.
And basically, SCF probably costs him, the metal polish for his second best yacht a year.
Yeah. There are definitely some very, very rich people here, which in some ways gives me a little bit of
that's a great reference.
gives a little bit of hope. Why? Because if you look at like America and you think of really more prolific, wealthy people, you're getting into your Elon Musk, Bill Gates, Warren Buffett, who all kind of have the same value system, and that value system propagates the kind of value system that wants to send FBI agents after people who write articles. You see what I mean? So in some hope, there are at least enough billionaires here who are maybe on a different wavelength that it can help, but I don't quite think they understand that they could also boil in the pot with the rest of humanity anytime soon. Meaning, yeah, their boat polish money, that's what they're willing to spend, and not a penny more.
Okay, there is one Russian plutocrat. I should remember his name. I mentioned him actually in this piece on CSIS, he's a rich guy. He lives in England. You probably know his name, Joachim. He's the guy who bought the football club? No.
Yeah, he owns Chelsea.
Abramovich.
He brags that he's got the second most expensive yacht in the world.
Yeah.
Actually.
Okay,
Abramovich.
I don't think that's Abramovich.
Yeah.
I think it's somebody else. Anyway, he was quoted on, I think, RT, saying he's sick and tired of the way Russians are treated in the West. Now, this is a rich guy who's pretty insulated from being insulted. And yet he gives several examples of how insulted he is. Somewhere in my website is a reference to him. So I just wonder if he is spending his metal polish on SCF. That's a small thing to counter it, but I don't know. I don't know how many people read SCF. I don't know how much effect it has. 3848, signed by President Trump, which sought to ascertain foreign interference in any future elections. So the Treasury Department's April 15, 2021 press release in connection with the designation of SCF and other Russian entities to be sanctioned pursuant to the executive order.
Right. I see.
Russian leaders, officials, and their proxies that attempt to interfere. So, that's pretty heavy-duty stuff.
Well, we're carrying on the program here. Click the record button. We had a little bit of technical difficulties, but it's just kind of a sad thing. But I think that what they are looking for is that sort of technicality where they can't violate your freedom of speech, but if they think you're involved in, some sort of maybe transactions or some sort of something manipulative, that's why they asked you those very specific questions about whether they changed your texts or you were doing what they wanted you to do. And that's one of the exact reasons why people write for the Strategic Culture Foundation, is because they don't. You write what you write, and it either gets published or it doesn't, and 99.999% of the time it gets published if they're an author that they sort of have faith in. So there's nothing there. There's also one of the weird things is there anything there that's really of a dangerous nature? Because when you think about how, we always talk about freedom of speech, they say, well, with freedom of speech, you can't yell fire in a crowded theater. That classic example, right? I don't remember anything ever being published even close to some sort of like doomsday, take action, go get a gun, kill people. Like nothing, never, nothing even close. It's just nuts.
Yeah, I think what they're looking at is the claim is the basis is interference in the elections, okay? But the sanctions are from the Treasury Department, are specific, okay? And they have like a section you can read, like this is the enforceability, this is what it means and stuff, and it's basically so. It's not what you might want it to, or I might. It's just like what it is, and what it is are you facilitating transactions? Is there a quid pro quo? Are you providing a service that they're buying from you? Yeah. Okay. So if you just write whatever you want and that's what they publish, you see what I'm saying?
Yeah, it's not.
And they haven't told you we're looking for this. Right. Mm-hmm. Like if I hire someone to come decorate my house, then I want something. And if it's bad, I'm like, you need to change this. Yeah. That's a service. Right. So, but if I have an artist come and I give him an honorarium and he does his art, and whatever his art is
yeah,
his
whatever
art,
it is, it is. Yeah.
then that's not a quid pro quo. That's
see.
an honorarium.
Mhm.
Okay, so that's different
I
anyway.
see.
So, but let's
The
we
Strategic
should probably
Culture
not
Foundation.
deconstruct that. We should not deconstruct
Yeah,
this
okay.
like today. I want to hear from Patrick about
Yeah.
conspiracy theories we can all
theories
agree
like-
on.
Yeah. Sorry, got a little bit
SCF
too deep into that, but
Well,
so anyways, maybe
conspiracy
Patrick.
theory,
First, you could start off. Could you
Conspiracy
define this, like this left and right dynamic? What are these competing conspiracy theories?
well, I don't think anybody could put it better than I did, which is
That's right.
which is that one large chunk of the American population thinks that Putin won the 2016 election, and another large chunk of the American population thinks that Trump won the 2020 election.
Okay, how did Trump win? Okay, all right.
How did Putin win? But that's
How
not
did
his point.
huh?
He's saying that these are conspiracy theories that are dividing the public, and what we need is a conspiracy theory that we can all agree on.
Well, the conspiracy theory we can all agree on is that China wants to invade Taiwan, or China is massacring, force-feeding Uyghurs, starving Uyghurs, force-feeding them pork.
Mm-hmm.
Or it's kind of hard to find one, because the U.S. is pretty divided. Pretty divided.
No.
And people believe what they're told less and less for some reason. So one of the other things I point in here is that when I was a kid, and I'm old enough to be your grandfathers, when I was a kid, people you still hear it, I read in the paper as being a kind of an authoritative statement. The paper said something or other. The trust in the American media is dropping rapidly. Once this COVID idiocy is over, it's going to be less than zero.
Right.
Trust in any authority is going to be down in the toilet.
No.
I mean, unmeasurably low. So let's come up with a conspiracy theory we can all agree on. I don't think we can. Russia's going to invade Ukraine. China's going to invade Taiwan. Everybody in Iran is crazy. There's various ones out there being floated.
Yeah.
Are they selling?
Depends. Well,
The
the question
China one
is
is selling well.
Well, the question
one
is
is selling.
how much does public support matter? Because I've written in the past that I think we're in sort of a post-truth phase where it really doesn't matter if the public particularly believes in any of this. All it matters is that it exists as an official truth. So if Russia is going to invade Ukraine, which ironically for years the Ukrainians said Russia already invaded, but that's a different story.
Many times.
But if Russia is going to invade, and that is the line that the mainstream media goes with, that's essentially enough reality for Washington to take action. Who cares what some guy in Kansas thinks? You see what I mean?
Oh, yes. And we've certainly seen that before with everything else. And this is where the term conspiracy theory is so useful. If you disagree that Russia is going to invade Ukraine next Monday, you're a conspiracy theorist. So not only are you wrong, but you're crazy. And you listening here to me tell him a conspiracy theorist, you get the message that I'm saying he's wrong and he's crazy. So you would be even wronger and crazier to agree with him. So for most people, that probably is good enough. And I got to say, looking around at the neighborhood in which I live, I have not seen anybody say, holy shit, I don't believe this COVID stuff anymore. I did last year, but I'm starting to lose my faith that lockdowns are the answer to the problem. I haven't actually run across anybody saying that. So it is, in fact, depressingly easy to fool a lot of people.
And
so the three of us are all in the business of trying to change people's minds. Have we ever done it?
Well, yeah, I think the situation is it's like when water is, slowly dripping down, drop by drop on a stone. It kind of can kind of wear it down, because if what we were writing and trying to be influential and change people's minds didn't do anything, I think society would look very different. I think it does do something, but I think very often a lot of people, especially in politics, the political realm of writing, really overinflate their self-importance. It's sort of like if one, again with the drops, if there's 1 million drops, well then you have a very large drink. You know what I mean? Something like that.
There's a book written by Phil Butler, Putin's Praetorians,
Mm-hmm.
in which he takes a bunch of people, including me. And the conclusion that I got from that, now I came to this a lot earlier than most of the people he's talking about, but it was something that convinced them that they were being lied to. And then they looked around and found us. That's, I think, the process. It's like a religious conversion. The person converts himself, and then he discovers that there's people like us out there, and there's a whole ocean of information that he never knew about.
Mm-hmm.
I have made one convert. I refer to him somewhere along the line. He writes for some American web thing. And again, it was that process of, I cannot believe that what they're saying about Russia could possibly be true. And he looks around and he finds me, Paul Robinson in Ottawa, and come on, that American actor, Stephen Cohen.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
And so I think that's what happens. So yes, we are having an effect. We just don't necessarily see it. We're not changing people's minds. We're reinforcing people who have changed their minds.
Well, yeah, and one of the other things too is to reiterate and to be very clear at this sort of dark hour in U.S.-Russian relations is we're having an effect because it's just as individuals we want to do this. We want to change people's minds. I mean, one of the reasons why I'm here and in a different country and not in Cleveland, which would have been a lot, easier, is because of this trash woke culture. But I got it first because I'm from a impoverished neighborhood in an urban environment. So I got to enjoy the wokeness in like the 90s before it became cool in 2012 or 2013 or whenever that term went mainstream. You know what I mean? So, yeah, so it's independent action. But again, going back to conspiracy theories, we talked a lot about the elections here. But what are some other fundamental ones? Because about wokeness, in a lot of ways, like this whole thing about like the patriarchy and intersectionalism, isn't that kind of one big conspiracy theory? Especially the patriarchy one.
Okay, first of all, I would say conspiracy theory is nothing but a swear word.
Oh.
Mm-hmm.
There's no such thing as a conspiracy theory.
Oh.
There are theories. Some of them are more probable, less probable. Some have been examined so that you can put your own personal level of probability on them. Some of them have not been examined at all. Some of them sound really way off the wall, and you might dismiss them because there's a limited amount of time in your life. But the only thing that you can truly call a conspiracy theory is something that is non-falsifiable.
Right.
And you get
no
this,
way to disprove it. Yeah.
Yeah. A very good example of this is the Q theory, guys.
Oh.
Remember all that stuff?
Yeah.
I spent some time in Trump year 2 watching this, and I noticed that none of their predictions ever came true. None of them.
Would you guys also like to be surprised? There is a Q thing in Russia, which is even weirder. Because they sort of believe in the American version, but they think it sort of applies to them and that they're like sending the message. It's even weirder.
Certainly there's a lot of people out there who say Trump and the Borg are all the same and everybody's working for the same thing. There's a whole school of thought out there now that COVID demonstrates that we're all somehow slaves of Klaus Schwab.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, but as I say, you hang on to the thought there's no such thing as a conspiracy theory. That's how I insult you.
Right.
Because you dare to say something that I disagree with. And so it's used as a weapon, and it is. And let's look at Kennedy's book on the real Dr. Fauci, which is selling like hotcakes. And finally, after about 6 weeks, a review of it appeared. And it was all of it, every word of it was personal insults on Kennedy.
Oh.
There wasn't the slightest attempt to discuss anything he said. And as Unz points out, a huge chunk of Kennedy's book is Fauci and AIDS. It's about a third of the book.
Yeah.
Not a single mention of that whatsoever. So this is your conspiracy theory thing. I'm not going to discuss what you said. I'm going to say you are a conspiracy theorist.
Now, the person who wrote this counter argument that wasn't really a counter argument, was this a conscious like when people do this, is it a conscious effort to just destroy their character, or is that like an instinctual reflex response from an irrational person?
No, I'm convinced now it's a conscious effort. That's my personal conspiracy theory. I mean, I don't believe anything the mainstream media says anymore about anything. And in fact, I go quite the reverse now. If they're all agreed on something, the
It
opposite
almost can't
is
be
true.
No.
I wanted to ask you, in your years with the Canadian Department of National Defense as an analyst, and I guess in the 80s and forward, mid 80s and forward, at that point in time, we were sort of in that weird part of the Cold War. In the U.S., we had Reagan already, and he was a very big Cold Warrior. What was the climate among your colleagues or people that you worked with, and how did you see? Really, my real question is, what did you see was the fundamental sea change that other people who still, earn their living off of the Cold War, despite it not having a foundation, anymore? What is the story there? Because certainly you were in this milieu, you have a lot of colleagues who continued on with this stuff after the fact.
Very long story, too long to discuss here because it's quite complicated. But I'll say this, the Department of National Defense was extremely open to good relations with the Soviets. When we had the very first staff talks, staff talks are what military do when they're being diplomatic with each other. At our very first staff talks, I should remember the date, but I can't, but it's again in my website, look it up. I was the sole civilian on this group that went to Moscow, and soldiers get along well because they're in the same line of work. I mean, they really do. So D&D was really open to this. Absolutely. It was foreign affairs. It was not. So we had some opposition to start this with them. And I was on a lot of these military to military staff talks, frequently the only civilian. And there was quite happy days, quite good stuff. So the Department of National Defense in 1986-87 was extremely open to the possibilities that the Soviet Union was changing. And I must say I had something to do with that. The military intelligence people were not. One of the disappointments of my young life was I had a patron who was open to this. I now realize, I was sort of went through this like some little dumb kid, but actually I had powerful supporters. And I often think about how that came to be because it happened when I wasn't noticing, but looking back on it, I can see some key moments where this guy said, yeah, this Armstrong guy does know what the hell he's talking about.
You had it on authority, or you heard it through the grapevine, or you had assessed that Gorbachev getting ready to announce a major unilateral arms reduction. There were people not happy about that.
No, don't get ahead of me. Basically, I was talking to the senior guys in the department, and they were listening to me seriously. Then in the fullness of time, a couple of weeks later, he did make a unilateral reduction. So I got my timing right. Now, the intelligence people, and I'll never forgive Gorbachev for this, the intelligence people were just on the point of putting out a paper saying I was wrong. There was no evidence of this on the very day that he made the announcement. If he'd only held off for one day, I'd have a copy of that paper. So the intelligence guys, the problem was, and the intelligence guys have never figured this out. The Soviet Union, the party leadership made the big decisions. And these eventually filtered down to the generals. So if you're watching the generals, you're always going to be behind. And of course, these guys were not particularly intelligent people. There's a saying in the Canadian military, if you screw up in the combat arms and you're ugly, you go into intelligence. And if you're good looking, you go into public relations. The officers, in my experience in Canadian military intelligence, are not smart. The NCOs on the other hand, are quite smart. And the guys who don't have the intelligence cap badges who are in the intelligence department are quite intelligent. I had excellent relations with one guy who was doing a lot of our inspections. So that was, to answer the real question, yeah, there was opposition, but at that time, in the Department of National Defense, there was a real openness and willingness to believe the Soviets were changing and to talk to them. And I well remember the atmosphere on the Soviet side in that first staff talks. They were visibly nervous because they had, in a sense, taken off some of their clothes and were waiting to see whether NATO would respond. And NATO did respond properly. It's later that things got screwed up. Now, in the background were, of course, all those people saying the Soviet Union will never change. They're all Russians. They're all evil. And these guys have come to dominate the conversation, and I'm not quite sure how that's happened. I thought, if you'd asked me in 2000, the Brzezinskis and the rest of these guys, I would say they're losing effect. But they've come back with knobs on, and they're now running the show into disaster. So here we are today.
Well, maybe
but you're familiar, intimately, as a well-read and someone who's written tremendously on the subject, the different ideas about why this is continuing. So you have opinions somewhere about, is it this sort of this velocity or gravity of these institutions that take on a life of their own? Is there something? Is this an issue of Matt Kindergarten? Is what is which you wrote about recently?
Well, you got the anti-Russians, who I thought, if you'd asked me back in 1980, I would have said they're anti-Soviet, but they turn out to be anti-Russian. You have the fact, and this is something that, I've never formally studied the Soviet Union or Russia. And I look back on that and consider that to be an advantage, because in North America, to a considerable extent, the people who teach these things are Ukrainians, Balts, or Poles, and they hate Russia. So I was never subjected to that. The Russians are the bad guys, no matter what color flag they're flying. So these people have persisted in this belief. And I guess the unilateral moment, the Brzezinski neocon crowd, whatever you want to call them, seized control of the steering wheel. And given the American prevalence to the city on the hill and all this crap, the U.S. just threw its weight around. Well, now it's come up against, we're going to find out in a week or two exactly what it's come up against. But the U.S. is obviously going down. And Russia and China and Iran are obviously rising, and they're getting closer. And the business in Kazakhstan, if anything, has just made the Russia-China axis more powerful, more effective, more worth joining. You got to think of the tobaccos out there. Shere Khan's kind of losing it, and he doesn't have the teeth that he used to have. Who's the new guy to join? I sometimes suspect Saudi Arabia is sort of thinking those thoughts. And success is very important. The United States is losing that success that it had in the 40s, the 30s and 40s and 50s. And now Russia, China are looking more successful. And that's the foundation of soft power. I'm successful. Be like me, you will be successful too. Yeah. The U.S. hasn't got that anymore, so now it has to rely on the fist.
One thing I can say almost here, defending America, is that no one is better at projecting that message than America. Because one thing that's very frustrating is just how terrible Russia is when it comes to soft power. It's shocking not from the inside, because you say from the inside, it means you're some kind of agent. Just from someone who works in a media job or has worked multiple media jobs here in Russia. It's like living in a world before psychology and marketing were even invented. You know what I mean? So I don't know. I think it's The picture does not look so unilateral from inside Russia as the way you make it look. I think economically things are definitely shifting, and Russia's definitely found this sort of symbiosis with China that's working out really well. But when it comes to showing off their success, I would say that still the average Russian believes that everything's better in the West. And that's the foundation of every color revolution. There's a very famous, now viral video going around the internet where a Kazakh guy in Russian, speaking Russian, no accent, talks about how he wants to live like they do, and I believe he says Norway and Sweden.
Oh,
That's the foundation of every color revolution.
well, at least he's got a kind of European Nordic model idea in mind. I mean, it's not Disneyland Coca-Cola, right? I mean, he's got some kind of social democratic idea, but for what it's worth. But I that's very interesting. You touch on those two.
Do you remember the underwear girl in Ukraine?
Yeah, it's the same thing. Yeah, it's exactly the same thing as the underwear girl. That's into maybe the audience doesn't know. She was in the very beginning of the Maidan. It was some girl who had this sort of poster about how she doesn't want to wear like something like ugly underwear because the standards for underwear within the Eurasian Economic Union, for some reason they wanted to get rid of lacy underwear. It's bad for your stuff down there or something. I don't understand it, but that's the fact of the matter. And so that's what it was all about. And it became this huge thing. But ultimately, and to this day, Russians use that for a lot of different memes and stuff because it's like Ukraine became the economic Zimbabwe of Europe for that kind of reasoning and logic.
Underwear girl. Yeah.
For the underwear girl's
and
logic.
Underwear girl, by the way, turns out to be an actress. And the next thing I heard about her, I have a little piece on this Ukraine, such as a hard story for girls. She was trying to get a job in Russia.
Not surprising.
I believe it. 4 days ago, last week, Patrick, you wrote about, recently, a couple of months ago, we covered something that you wrote about how the period of the effectiveness of color revolutions are winding down because they're kind of the mechanics of them are visible and leaders and planners have kind of wrapped their heads around it. Now we're looking at a situation in Kazakhstan where it looks like, we're not afraid to be critical of Russian media or RT or anything. I'm
sure not.
Tim, yeah, right. They're spinning it like CSTO, Russia, they're in danger from hooligans running rampant in the streets. But we know also, and that's not maybe untrue, but we also know that people got hit with like a double, triple, quadruple of gas prices, right? And we know that Russia is a gas provider. We know that gas prices are going up for almost every country in Europe, not the EU, but actually all of Europe, except for like Serbia and someone else. Mm-hmm. So it's strange, obviously when, this is my opinion, right? So obviously when Russia comes in and they deploy troops to your country in response to protests that were sparked by a rise of fuel costs, it seems reasonable to assume, this is a conspiracy theory until we can establish what's the falsifiability, right? So the idea being here, Patrick, that Russia's flexing its muscle. I know you wrote about this 4 or 5 days ago, but you have a take on it.
First of all, I was a little nervous because having gone out there and said color revolutions have now been figured out and they can stop them. So here we have one that obviously has color revolution elements to it. In Kazakhstan, I said, it has been stopped. Mm. Right?
No.
And I find it's yes, of course, the gas prices. And the fact that Kazakhstan is to some degree ruled by a bunch of guys who make sure they get their finger in the pot, although name a country that doesn't. And you can't make a color revolution without some grievances. Mm-hmm. But the sudden appearance of armed men, the sudden appearance of political demands the sudden appearance of some guy who's outside of the country, who's suddenly the leader and talking about democracy, that's color revolution.
Mm-hmm.
And the fact that it appears to have been squashed, the fact that possibly, as some people say, Tokayev is cleaning out Nazarbayev's people, that he took advantage of this, maybe we'll see. But there's a couple of observations I would make about this. The first one is little countries usually often play a game of playing off the two big guys against each other. That's a good strategy, and it works quite well. But I think it ought to be pretty obvious now to Lukashenko and Kazakhstan and all the rest of them is the U.S. isn't playing that game. The U.S. wants to take you over completely. So don't try and balance the U.S. against Russia, because the U.S. isn't playing that game. It is going to overthrow you. You play nice with them, they'll play nasty with you. And I think that Lukashenko and Tokayev, or Nazarbayev certainly, had an element of that. I think they've learned you can't do that anymore. It's not. You could do that in the Cold War, I guess. Yugoslavia did it to a degree. Mm-hmm. The second thing I find interesting about this is color revolutions have a certain pattern. There's the spark that sets them off. Mm-hmm. Then there's the protests that are nonviolent. Then there's the protests that are mostly nonviolent, with the Western media, of course, saying that how in hell they said the Maidan was nonviolent. I mean, the whole background, everything's on fire, for Christ's sake. And it takes some time to develop the tent cities. The color is chosen. The leader of the opposition, who happens to be in a friendly foreign country, appears. Blah blah blah. All of this thing took place in 2 days?
Pretty quick, yeah.
Somebody really wound up and it's got to be connected with the talks that Russia and the United States are having.
Well, it's certainly a coincidence, that's for sure. At the very least.
I can't. So, yeah, the gas price thing, and I don't why they did that suddenly, but this I find an interesting phenomenon. So, yes, I do believe that my hypothesis that they figured out how to stop color revolutions has been vindicated. And secondly, I think there's got to be a connection in here. I think what we had here is a color revolution that was long planned, that seized the opportunity that appeared with the gas price increases. Propane is what we're basically talking about here. We North Americans would know it as propane. It's not sort of gas that Russia pipes around the place, or the gas that we North Americans put in our automobiles. So I suspect that somebody said, oh boy, let's go. So who's that somebody? Which brings us down to what is, I think, the geopolitical big question of 2022. Who is in charge in the United States? I refuse to believe it's Biden. Certainly isn't Harris. I mean, who spends all her time in the basement being trained up so she can make a public appearance, screw up, and go back into the basement for more training. Joe is, although he did get out of Afghanistan, every time I think Joe is just some front, he did get out of Afghanistan, and he sure would have had opposition in doing that. I don't care how bungled it was, they're out of the damn place. Any getting out would have been messy. So who's running the United States? Biden's response to the Russian ultimatum, people don't like that word, but I think effectively that's what it is, has not been too bad. He's shown some openness.
Well, yeah.
Pulling off a color revolution the week before the discussion. I mean, as I say, who's sending what message to whom?
Well, yeah, and also with I was really surprised that the United States didn't laugh down the Russians' demands, because they posted this sort of list of demands of the vision of what they want things to be, and the response was like, okay, let's meet and discuss it. That's weird. That's very unexpected for me. Maybe I'm naive. I don't know. So that also gives me a little bit of hope that maybe we can sort of redraw the map to Europe and things can go into a nice, boring, multipolar world where everyone knows what side of the line they're on, and life will get a little bit more dull in a good way.
Maybe. I don't hold out a lot of hope, because who can deliver the United States? Theoretically, the President of the United States can deliver the United States, right?
Mm-hmm.
Well, I don't think that's the case now. I don't think anybody's in charge.
Well, I remember 6 years ago, Lavrov said that the U.S. even then was non-agreement capable. And you can't.
Remember, the actual incident that set him off on that was he and Kerry had spent something like 2 weeks locked up in a room negotiating something on Syria. This is the one where Lavrov bought pizzas for everybody at the end.
Mm-hmm.
A week, the Americans, by accident, had attacked the Syrian army position just as it was being attacked by jihadists. An accident, of course. These things happen. Well, that was the moment. Who the hell is in charge? The Secretary of State of the United States has made an official agreement with the Russian government. That's a done deal, right? No, well, some general decides it isn't.
Ironically, I'm going to ask you to possibly go into the realm of conspiracy theories. Big irony of the day. But who could this be? I mean, because in a lot of ways, people want to, and when they make up conspiracy theories, it's a lot of ways of trying to structure what's happening around them. But if
he just said nobody's in charge.
Well, if nobody's in charge, does that mean there's competing factions, or does that the system is broken down to? There's a difference between.
Good question.
Okay, so you're on a ship. There's 15 guys fighting for the rudder. Or is there just no one on the ship and the wind is just taking it wherever it hits the ground, or the beach will hit the beach? You know?
I guess I'll be a coward and say they're both the same. You got 15 guys fighting for the rudder, with the result that the rudder isn't being used and the ship is in fact adrift.
Gotcha. Okay.
But now, who are we talking about here? Now, as you may know, I write for Colonel Lang's blog, Colonel Pat Lang. Serious guy. He likes to call it the Borg.
Yeah.
Now, I'm no fan of Star Trek, and I don't really know who the Borg is, so I had to look it up. And I gather it's a hive mind.
Correct.
Of some sort.
I'm the nerd who knows the answer.
Okay. I think that's a better description. These are a bunch of people who think the same way. We're not talking about a bunch of people who put on funny robes and get together in a room somewhere and make the plan. Although the more I see of COVID, the more I believe that is what's happening. It's more a bunch of people who think the same way, have been encouraged to think the same way. The people who don't think the same way have been sidelined or fired or gone into some other business. So it's a bit like the media business. And the phrase that I'm always trying to get people to adopt, because I think it's really brilliant, is they're paid to believe what they believe to be paid. So you have a complete relationship like that. Mm-hmm. And the guys who doubted, they're just not there anymore. And they got fired, or they decided they'd be happy doing something else, or they didn't get promoted, or they didn't make it into the board, which does not have a bunch of leaders that get together. So now, why do people believe in conspiracy theories? Because they don't believe the official story. That's why. Easy peasy.
Oh.
And there's more and more. Official stories are harder and harder to believe these days.
So it's kind of like an echo chamber factor. In fact, I listened to a very interesting interview. It was Ray McGovern and Regis Tremblay were talking, and McGovern kind of got into talking about Milley, the head of, what would that be? Head of the Joint Chiefs of Staff. And he kind of described him as being this sort of like, yes men get to the top. And in a lot of ways at the top, there's a lot of yes men. But the thing is, if everyone's saying yes, but there's no leader, there's nothing to say yes to. I'm sorry, I use the expression if that makes sense a lot, but sometimes I'm in my own mind and I think I'm nuts.
So McGregor writes for the little group of us who are on Colonel Lang's blog, and McGregor writes this kind of stuff, and I think he's recently done that. And he confirmed something that I've long suspected, that in the U.S. Army, at any rate, the last point at which you are an independent thinker is the rank of colonel.
Mm-hmm.
Above that, you're one of the team.
Gotcha.
And then at a certain level higher, what you actually are and this is, I think, a mistake that Trump made. You're not actually talking to this warrior, highly decorated warrior guy. You're talking to the next vice president of sales of General Dynamics.
Gotcha.
Right.
Once upon a time, American General, you remember it's a stupid movie, White Christmas? The general's retired, living this crappy little inn in Vermont. He wants to get back into the business.
Right.
These days, he'd be a VP sales at some place, and he'd be making a shitload of money. And nobody thinks this is exceptional. I'll tell you something else Americans don't find exceptional. Ex-presidents becoming multimillionaires.
Yeah.
Now, a lot of presidents were wealthy when they started, but Harry Truman lived off his pension and what he earned from writings. Richard Nixon had his pension and his writings. Jimmy Carter lives relatively simply, although he was fairly well-to-do in the beginning. Clinton, how much are those guys worth? Several $100 million. Yeah. Obama's heading in that direction. Why is nobody saying, what the hell's going on here? What we have now in the United States is a system where it's illegal to bribe the president, but you can post-bribe him. So here's $1 million advance for your stupid book that nobody's going to read.
Or the ridiculously, millions of dollars for giving a speech. That kind of stuff. I see. Gotcha.
I used to sit there and I'd say, why the hell would anybody listen to Bill Clinton give a talk on what he would do if he should by any chance become president? And it took me a long time to realize that they were bribing the next president.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
The United States, I would argue, is one of the most corrupt countries in the world.
Well, hypothetically, let's think of things from this, again, Russian street perspective, the perspective of people who participate in color revolutions because they kind of want to live in America. Well, they could say, well, look at Kazakhstan. Like here, let me tell you an anecdote. Dated a girl in Kazakhstan, and she said, although she didn't really like the Russians, and she dated a guy who's ethnically Slavic, which is a weird choice. But anyways, her sort of expression was, in Russia, the government creates a plan, and someone steals a little bit along the way. And in Kazakhstan, someone creates a plan, and they steal everything. As in, it never gets done. All right? So when you're coming from that perspective, in America, you could see, well, there's plenty of roads, and the houses are big, and the cars are big, and the electricity works, and the most powerful army in the world, and although it's sometimes unaffordable, I'm from Cleveland, so John Hopkins Medical Center is amazing, but if you have a heart attack, that's the best place you'd ever want to go to. Mm-hmm. You see? So...
Well, I understand that, and it comes back to the soft power. Now, did you read Dmitry Orlov's piece on Russian soft power?
No.
Very interesting. He says Russia is on the verge of scoring an enormous soft power advantage in that it is old-fashioned, conservative, family values, and all that stuff. It's not woke.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Correct. If they can approach the...
Have you read that one, Joachim?
If they can approach the mystery illness in a way that speaks to the silent majority, then I think that would be a big turning point. I mean, people are even thinking about where to relocate, where to move.
Yeah, they talk to me very often about that. I'll tell you that much. But the problem with Russian soft power is that is true. That is everything. That is absolutely true. Russia has this gigantic soft power advantage. We'll call it the soft power football. But for some reason, their gloves are too thick. They can't feel it because they can't make a movie that demonstrates it. They can't make a video game that'll demonstrate it. They can't relay that audience. They can't send out this signal so some 12-year-old in, Wyoming or Vladivostok or Peking, Beijing now, is going to see this and be like, wow. That those Russians, they've really done it.
Maybe they have a Kazakhstan problem. Maybe someone takes the money before the thing can get made.
That's also very possible.
Well, I wrote a little piece about corruption. We got to think about what corruption is. For example, let's consider 3 cases. The government is going to build a hospital, and it builds the hospital, but you got to bribe everybody to get anything done.
Mm-hmm.
You got to give $5 to the nurse to change the bedpan,
Yeah.
$5 for this and so on. Second case, the hospital is built, but the money to make it operate has been stolen.
Mm-hmm.
The third case, the whole thing's stolen before anybody even knows it's being planned. So what's the worst case of corruption? What's the most notable case of corruption?
Ooh,
Well, obviously, the $5 a bedpan is the most noticeable because everybody's involved.
Yeah.
But the worst form of corruption is the money stolen before it even starts.
Uh-huh.
And nobody knows about it.
Right.
So what we have in our dear countries, we have that kind of corruption in which basically the U.S. Congress has been bought. Everything it does is paid for. Not, I think, so bad in Canada, I'd like to think. But in Canada, we have all kinds of quiet little bribes that nobody ever knows about because of the tremendous number of positions that are in the gift of the Prime Minister.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, way more than any other country in the world. The Prime Minister appoints, you wouldn't believe how many cushy little appointments there are in the gift of the Prime Minister. So that's the way we do it. In the United States, they buy... Nancy Pelosi saves $100 million out of her housekeeping money.
Gotcha. Well, with that,
of course there's corruption in Russia, but we all got to sit down and think about it. And I would say for the average Russian stiff, life is visibly better in 20 years than 20 years ago.
Well, that's the one nice thing about being here is obviously someone watching this might feel my opinion is biased, so they should probably ask around. But in America, you always get the feeling that everything gets worse every year. Here, you get the feeling that most things are sort of going in the right way. Not all, but most. And it's kind of a good feeling. I'll put, I think Russia will make it. We'll be around in the 22nd century. We'll make it. Who knows what's going to happen right now in America, very unfortunately. Again, my life would be much easier if things were good there.
I have one unsatisfied question.
Sure. We'll make that the last question for the day.
For Patrick.
Yeah.
In light of all of this, a conspiracy theory that all Americans can agree on.
I don't think there is one. I think the U.S. is now irretrievably broken. And COVID, I think, has probably broken it farther. At the end of this, there's going to be practically nobody believing any official statement on anything. So they'll be off in their own little universes, only talking to themselves. It's already very much that way.
Oh, yeah.
And there will be just nothing in common. So does this lead to, the big question in 1861? Does this lead to a civil war? Or does it lead to people just dropping out? I can see that happening. We're just not going to pay any attention. Over here, our little corner here, not, crazy militiamen in Montana, but we're just not going to pay any attention to you. We're not going to vote. We're not going to pay taxes. We're going to just avoid you.
Well,
I should hope the U.S. is irretrievably broken.
I should hope.
I think the West is irretrievably broken. The U.S. just happens to be ahead of the curve.
Well, yeah, and in some ways, there are certain people within Russia who are sort of writing that essentially Russia could have the mission of either saving Europe. Essentially, Europe is collapsing. At some point, it's going to cry out for help. Or essentially, let it go because it'll become this sort of mess where no one is in charge and be able to sort of restructure things. That's what they're writing, but not me. But I just want to say that if 1861 happens again, that would be a true tragedy because I think it worked out to be 3% of the population died on the battlefield, and it would be way, 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 way worse in terms of how many people would die if that were to occur again. It would be...
Well, as I like to say, we in Canada have survived 2 American civil wars. We could survive the 3rd.
Hopefully.
But let me just leave you this cheerful thought. As I say, I'm 74 years old. I've been thinking that the West is going down the toilet for some time. I always thought it would outlast me. I'm not so sure now.
All right. Well,
with that note, I think has really driven the nail right into the heart.
Well, with that note, we'll leave it here, and hopefully we'll all be back next week, including the United States of America, happy and healthy.